Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to, the month of June, a beautiful day. Marcus, actually, I'm going to have you open us up. So we have two required orders of business prior to jumping into our school board meeting. So we are going to let Marcus open up. He's going to do an ESSER update, so we'll have an ESSER hearing. And then we'll also have a hearing on our 2023-2024 proposed budget, where Marcus will share those assumptions that have gone into the budget. Mr. Leon, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So thank you for coming tonight to our second 6-month update on our use of ESSER 3 funds. ESSER 3, which is also known as the American Rescue Plan, which was signed into law back in March of 2021. As we know, it's one of the largest stimulus packages to date. Was allocated over $120 billion for education nationwide. JPS's share of that was just over $22 million. And just to give a brief update on the timeline for all three phases of ESSER funding. ESSER 1, as you know, we have finished with that as of last June of 2022. The second round of ESSER expenditure period ends in a couple of weeks here, so we'll be wrapping up the second round. And then the current ESSER 3 phase that we're in is a 2-year expenditure period that runs through the end of next June. So everything that we've talked about in our initial proposal and the 6-month update we provided a few months ago back in the winter kind of goes over those deadlines. And then remember, we have that requirement of 20% of these funds required to be spent to address learning loss. Some allowable uses of ESSER 3 funds that we've seen before. I've highlighted some of the ones after surveying and speaking with the community, some of the ones that were called out for us to use the funds for, which we in turn applied for the grant funding. And you'll see those areas that we really hit were increasing mental health supports, adding instructional support for intervention or special education, addressing learning loss, and continuing to employ and/or hire new staff. Again, just an updated timeline. Back in the fall of 2021, we had sent community surveys out via mass email, the JPS website, hard copies, so on and so forth. We submitted the grant back in December of 21, the original grant, and then we submitted our budget last summer after the initial hearing that we had. We had our budget approval shortly after in July, and then we submitted an amendment to our budget just as we've gone through the year. We know some of those things that we didn't know at the time, numbers on curriculum updates and things like that. So we went and submitted another amendment to the budget earlier this month, which was approved by MDE, by the state, which encompasses some of those things that the board has taken action and approved on in recent months, like the curriculum for all grades, K through 12, and things like that. And we'll amend the grant continuing through next year as needed, as things come up and change. So just to give everybody an update, through the first week of June, we have spent approximately $8 million out of the $22 million. Now, again, last year when we went through our budgets, we had said that we would spend approximately half each year, so about $10 to $11 million this year and about $10 to $11 million next year. That's through June 7th. So as we finish up June, we feel that we're on target to hit that $10 to $11 million spend mark for the 22-23 fiscal year. That includes about $20,000 in AVID training that we've talked about, which is teaching teachers strategies to have consistent teaching strategies throughout the district, which will help address learning loss. We spent approximately $1.2 million on curriculum that I think we approved at the board table last month. And I'm happy to share that a lot of that has been delivered as we speak, with just a couple of buildings left. So that was great. The publishers were able to get us those materials. So now we're in the process of sorting those out, getting them to classrooms, and then we'll be able to work with the teachers this summer and in August when we come back on being able to implement those strategies throughout the district next year. We're also continuing to add special ed staff as we have in our budget. We've begun the ordering process for the sensory rooms that we discussed last year, both at Parkside and for Street Learning Center and Pathways in the high school. And then again, we amended our budget on June 6th, and we'll submit others as needed throughout the next fiscal year. Really, it's just a quick 6-month update on where we've been, how we got here, where we're at currently. So I'm going to end that presentation part and leave it open to any comments or questions.
This is the point in the hearing where if community members would like to come forward, we'd welcome you to come up, use the microphone, please. Feel free to ask Marcus questions with regards to ESSER 3. That's really, again, the focus here. So there's no formal slip process. This is just an open conversation with the community, hence the hearing. So if you would like, I'd be happy to help navigate that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Leon. I was just wondering, just going through your update, you talk about adding special ed staff. And since the ESSER funding is essentially, I mean, it's at an end, it's one time, it's non-recurring, are there other, faculty costs are recurring? So is there any concern about using ESSER funds to add recurring costs being based off non-recurring funding like ARPA?
So when we were going through and kind of looking at the areas we wanted to address, special ed staff, all staffing is very hard to come by, as we know in education, special ed especially hard at times.
Yeah.
What we decided and the approach that we've taken is we want to look to hire extra staff now using these ESSER funds, have those staff on board, and then be able to use those to slide into place as we have people retire and leave over the next year or two. So we'll be doing advanced hiring, I guess, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't, fiscally, we would just have that person already on staff.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have to hire the next person that's retiring. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. And I was actually thinking, even as I was listening, even before I came up, that having special ed people and people who are going to try to address learning loss and emotional problems and all these things associated with COVID, those people are going to really be at a premium for a while. Just one very, very quick question. Could you just explain to everyone what the sensory rooms are you're talking about?
Sure, I'll start and then I'll let Jeremy jump in as well since they're at his building. So the sensory rooms, we're looking to create safe spaces for kids as they have things come up during the day. So in the past, kids would leave school. We want to keep them in school. So this would be more of a space where kids could go to cool down, take a break, take a breather, and then, calm, refocus, and then be able to go back into the classroom. Yes.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Questions on ESSER? All right. Mr. Leon, seeing none.
Can we ask questions or no?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry.
So just in follow-up to his question, really, should we have folks who aren't retiring, we just have extra folks that you've hired? What's the plan for them? Or is it just we're letting them go, or do we have another plan in place for the special education folks that you're hiring? If we don't have folks who are retiring, to kind of swap them out, is there another plan in place? I know because we need them, it sounds like.
So actually, if you don't mind, we actually anticipate, an attrition of between 15 and 20. So we're already looking ahead at our staffing needs moving into next year. We recognize how many of our folks have got or are coming of retirement age. So that's part of the planning process, Ms. Hamilton.
So you don't have any fear about, losing anybody, the ones that are just coming in?
We don't want to lose anybody, but we certainly recognize that as staff move out, we'll have a job either to replace or not based on needs. So some of the positions may be specialized. If I've got an emotionally impaired or a cognitively impaired teacher, that requires a very specific certification. But as Mr. Leon has indicated, we've been hiring for those positions. We're advanced hiring now so that when it comes time to reduce our budget in the future, and this is going to be a responsibility of the entire board, not just of this board, but of future boards, as we have built our war chest, if you will, in our fund balance to control the expenses out of that fund balance in future years. And that will be determined largely based on what goals this board sets for where we want to be in any given year. So we've been living in an age where the money seems rather flush today, but that in the future, we've all lived through hard times before, and we anticipate those to come about again. So at some point down the road, we'll have attrition that we'll have to deal with, and it'll be on this board to determine how deep that attrition cuts, or to, if you will, control the spigot for how much of that fund balance gets spent out in any given year. I hope that answered your question, Ms. Hamilton.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Hamilton?
No, my mic is off. Thank you.
Okay, all right. All right, then with that, I will close the ESSER 3 stakeholder hearing for June of 2023. Next up is a budget hearing. Again, we're required by the revised school code to hold a hearing talking through our budget assumptions and what goes into our budget. Mr. Leon will open that up, if you would, please.
All right, so we'll go through I've got two presentations to show here, so we'll go through them one at a time. Again, one of the things that we're required to announce in the budget hearing is the millage rates. So for the upcoming 23-24 fiscal year, we'll be levying 18 mills for operating on non-homestead properties and commercial property. And then you'll see the millages to service our three debt millages that are out there, along with the recreation millage and the assumed revenue that we're hoping to collect for all of those. Some other assumptions that we've used in building this budget is a budgeted pupil count of 4,700, which is approximately 140 less than it stands today. And I guess these are, unknowns that we're using conservative figures to try to put a number out there for a proposed budget. As the picture becomes clear in the fall, we will again amend the budget after enrollment comes in, after that state budget, which we still don't have finalized, will be final. We've used the foundation allowance of $9,516, which is $366 more than the current allowance of $9,150. That $366 is the lowest figure of the three House, Senate, and Governor proposals that are out there right now. So again, we use that lowest conservative number just to be safe at the time being. And again, we'll amend in the fall. And because we have no state budget, we're not sure what the retirement rate is going to be. So at this time, we just left it flat. At this point, just because it's a big unknown at this time. So we're just going to use that, and we'll be able to come back with better figures once we have them. The next slide is just a historical graph that'll show the foundation allowance change to the years. And, we have a 10-year history, and as you can see, post-COVID is where we've seen some of the bigger gains. Starting in 21-22, we were at $8,700, which moved up about $400 this year to $9,150. And then you can see the current estimate that we're using, that $9,516 as a foundation allowance for our revenue for this coming year. The next slide will show similarly a 10-year history of student count at JPS. And I'd really caution, you'll see in 2021, there's that asterisk. So that's the first full year after of the pandemic where the state changed how we counted students because of COVID. We went to what they call a super blend count. So typically what we do to count is we'll use 90% of the fall count and 10% of the prior spring count. And they changed that to help districts out for the 2021 year. So that's a different calculation. 21-22 is back to the traditional method of the 90-10 split of how we count students for enrollment purposes. You'll see that drop off as we re-entered semi-normal life and education. We've done some good things, and you can see we were just under 4840 this year, but given the short recent trend history, that's kind of why we're using that declining amount just to be safe at this time until, again, we kind of create that new base in the new post-COVID world that we're in as far as enrollment. So as we move forward a few years, we'll have a better history and be able to change that estimate up, I'm sure. Some assumptions on the expenditure side, some things we do know. So the health insurance hard cap that we approved a couple of months ago, which says the district can spend up to a mandated level mandated by the state, is going to increase about 4% for calendar year 2024, which is what our insurance plan is, this January through December plan year, which is approximately an extra $820 that the district will be able to pay towards a full family health insurance premium annually. So as you can see, not a ton, it's a little bit. It's tied to the prior 12-month inflation index, I believe, so it's always a year in arrears. Again, we use an approximate 10% increase on utilities. As we move through, that's a big unknown. We just won't know what they are until we hit the season, because there could be a mild winter or a cold winter. We just won't know. And again, that retirement rate that I showed on the first slide, which includes some of that unfunded pension liability, that's 16.5%, that everybody pays towards the underfunded pension liability for the state. And again, we have no state budget, so we don't have an updated number yet. And then other miscellaneous staff and other adjustments. To summarize the general fund, we're projecting collecting almost $76 million, $75,911,484. And right now our projected expenditure levels are about just over $72.6 million, which gives us an increase of $3,290,000 almost, which would be an increase to fund balance. Our estimated fund balance at the end of this year, which is an estimate until we finish the year and have it audited, will wind up at almost $15.5 million. So our goal right now, our first look, we're thinking will be a little bit just south of $19 million by the end of next June, which would put us at 25% of our estimated prior year or this 22-23 expenditures, which is stated in our board policy. We like to have a 15% per our board policy, 15% fund balance based on the prior year expenditures. So that's how that is calculated. And then the next slide is a pictorial view of that. So again, a historical graph of fund balance and that 15% goal. So as you can see, thanks to some of the additional funding we've received through ESSER, we've been able to meet and exceed that 15% goal, like Mr. Beal said, banking that fund balance for the future. Some other, oh, sure.
Do you have those by the year of what the fund balance was?
In terms of dollar amounts?
Yeah.
Oops. I do. I'm not a graph expert.
I'm trying to visualize what that is.
I do have that data. I could send it to you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sure.
Some other funds that are in our budget proposal tonight include the food service fund, which includes that community eligibility provision for all buildings, so all the students are entitled to free breakfast and lunch. The school activity funds, which is just an accounting of all the student internal club funds that is in the control of the individual clubs, and the district merely holds the money and writes the checks for the money that's raised. So it's not general fund dollars, it's a separate fund. We are just caretakers of those monies. The debt service fund, which is, again, to service the debt for the various bond projects that have happened throughout the years, and then our capital project funds. And I'm going to close that out. Move over to the next handout in the packet on the budget, which is our budget book, which I'll go through briefly. The first tab or page that you have is a summary of all the funds. So the general fund, the operating, our two special revenue funds, food service and student activity, debt service and capital projects. This breaks it down a little bit by category. So where's our revenue coming from? About $10.5 million from property taxes. That's both operating and the recreation millage, which is a pass-through fund, and things of that nature. And then our expenditures broken out by, again, by those functions, which we'll see a little bit later on in different charts. So instruction, basic program, added needs, which is where you'll find special ed and compensatory education, things like that. And then down towards the bottom, you'll have summaries that show, again, summarizing that increase the fund balance for each fund, the $3.2 million we're looking to add for the general fund. You'll notice in the food service fund, a zero fund balance. So we've talked throughout the last year or so about food service where we've had an excess fund balance. We're required by the state and the federal government to spend down if we have an excess fund balance. So we've had a plan in place that we've been implementing, including updating freezers, vehicles, other equipment throughout the district, kind of updating and modernizing and utilizing those funds. So, again, the food service fund is mostly a self-sustaining fund without help from the general fund. So again, that just shows that we're doing what we said we were going to do with it. And then same for the student activity. You can see the debt fund and the capital projects there, and then it adds everything together if you're interested in that. So that's just a summary breakdown. And then we will break down on the next one where the revenues are coming from, both where they were coming from this year, next year, and any increase or decreases. You can see right now we're projecting a smaller revenue stream from the state, but again, we're not sure what that foundation allowance is, and then we're not sure what our student count is, so that will be one that will change greatly come the next amendment. So if anyone's wondering about things like that. Then on the next slide, this will go through even more detail, just kind of summarizes the general fund from the first tab. So it breaks down again the local revenue from, property taxes, transportation, athletics, gets your total local revenue of $11.5 million. That state revenue number of just under $47 million. And we're where we estimate to be at the end of this year. Same thing with our federal funds. Again, we predict will be a little over $12 million in ESSER grants. So that would be ESSER 2 and 3 at the combined, because we're still spending the end of ESSER 2 and then the first round of ESSER 3. And then next year, that would leave us with just the remainder of that ESSER 3 money, about that $10.5 million. And then that, again, will tie out to that fund balance that we had shown in the beginning. Yep.
Marcus, how much of the fund balance is cash versus value of assets?
That depends, and it's a moving target every day as whatever our bank balance is, right?
Okay,
I
yeah.
don't have that figure today, but I think we mentioned, I know in finance committee and throughout the year, we're at the point where we're not borrowing for operations, we're actually investing money. So, I know that we have a couple of $1 million in investments right now, a few $1 million outside of our day-to-day accounts for operations. So, yep. And then on the next slide, we're going to break down expenditures by what they are, whether they're instruction, general business, operations, transportation, so on and so forth. As you can see, the biggest part of our business is instruction and instructional support at about 74%, which is pretty consistent historically, as it should be. And you can see that for all the categories, how they've changed from this year to next year, and ballpark what we're spending it on. And then the next slide will break that down even further, as to what are we spending our money on. And again, we're a people business, so our biggest expense is people. So salary and benefits, again, about 73% of our budget, which is in line with most districts around the state. You're spending anywhere from 72 to 80%, depending on the district, on salary and benefits, as that is our biggest expense. And then purchase services, just under 20%. And then really, we can say we're spending a lot of money on supplies and materials, but in the grand scheme, it's 5% of the entire budget. So we really, we put our money where it should be, which is in the people to teach students. And then we have broken down again those expenses through every single function code in the district, which is just how we record these expenses on our general ledger, whether it's in elementary, middle school, high school. So we've broken our expenses down that far, I guess. It's a few pages. It's a lot that goes into it. And how we get back to that $72.6 million expense line. And I think that is going to do it for my presentation of the documents. So I will turn it over once again for any comments or questions on the proposed budget for next year.
Thank you, Marcus. All right, much like with the ESSER hearing, I'd invite the community or public to come forward with questions or comments on the budget assumptions. We go through a process at Jackson Public Schools where we amend our budget multiple times. As you heard Marcus say, there's a lot of unknowns in the current budget. We don't have a budget from the state, and that's not uncommon. The state is required to adopt a budget by their fiscal year, so in October, and we're required to adopt our budget no later than June 30th. So we create a lot of unknowns. Again, we don't know what the foundation allowance will be. We don't know what our at-risk funds will be, and we don't know what our federal allocations will be, nor do we know what our pupil count will be. So there's a lot of unknowns, and we tend to create these projections based on 5-year trends. But one thing we do that is unique to Jackson Public Schools is we amend the budget multiple times throughout the year. So we will bring back an amended budget in November for the board to be able to adopt in December, and that budget updates us on the revenue side of the equation. So it keeps us current with where did our assumptions come in. And you heard Marcus, we tend to predict, kind of worst case scenarios so that we don't find ourselves in deeper water than we want to be come fall. And then we amend it again in March, where we update the expenses side and track. This is how we're keeping track of our expenses month by month. Where are we at? Are we where we said we were going to be? And then obviously in June, we bring it back for a final amendment. But at this time, if there are any community input or questions, comments by the stakeholders, now is the time to do that. And again, there's no formal process. If you want to come forward, please come up, use the mic so that we can hear you, and we would love to take your input. And I think there's a button.
Can you hear me? Hi, I'm Amy Doro. I'm a parent of a student in Jackson Public Schools, and I've lived in Jackson County for 20 years. I have another student who's graduated Jackson Public Schools. And my question about the budget is, how will the board make sure that funds are distributed equitably, not necessarily equally, to students of lower income in the schools of lower income, to ensure that all students have the same opportunity for the same types of not curriculum, but extracurriculars, and also for field trips, after-school activities, and opportunities. Because what I've observed in both of my children in Jackson Public Schools, and we were fortunate to live in a higher income district or area, is that my children got to do a lot of things that other children of their same age in other Jackson Public Schools didn't get to do. And what I also observe is that sometimes, especially at the elementary level, the schools that are in higher income areas have more opportunities for before and after school activities than other schools. So my question is about equity, not necessarily equality and distributing those funds equally, but looking at the schools where the students' parents may not be able to afford to put their student in whatever extracurricular activity they want to do, and boosting those families up by providing extra money to that school in whatever way makes the most sense.
Thank you very much. Actually, Marcus, Julie, you guys have spent, I don't know, several weeks kind of working on that exact thing. Do you want to speak to how those funds are allocated, the opportunities that you sit down with each building to kind of go through their budget for the upcoming school year?
One of the funds that we receive is Title I funding. And so that is assigned to buildings K through 5. And it really does depend on the number of students that are called at risk, basically. So students that are from, that, come from lower socioeconomic households or have other risk factors. And so they receive a larger dose of that money, and that money is it goes for services that include the after-school program, the summer school program. We do that at the district level using the same funding of Title I. And then we also use it for people, so additional people. So to make sure that we have retired teachers to work with students that are struggling, that we have paraprofessionals, behavior interventionists, social workers. Between that and also another funding fund piece section, 31A, we also use that for those additional people to make sure that we can be as equitable as possible and meet the needs of students as they exist in each building. So that's one way that we do it. But we are concerned. Sometimes we note that some of those differences come up in fundraising. And that's, something that we've kind of had some discussions about how we can address that.
That's more what my question was about, was the schools that are able to fundraise, or the parents that are able to pay for the Mackinac Island trip, or the parents that are able to pay for the zoo trip, or able to read and complete the waiver to go kayaking, that those students have different opportunities than the students whose parents may not be able to do those things. And so my question, and I guess my challenge, if it hasn't, it sounds like you're starting to talk about it, is that the school board look at equity among students of lower socioeconomic households in all of those areas. I know the Title I funding is meant to boost up schools that are in lower socioeconomic areas, and I have a child now who just is in summer school at the middle school at Parkside, who had major behavioral issues during the school year. And the solution that the school had for him, even with all of the Title I funding that I know middle school at Parkside gets, is to suspend him multiple times, and also for nonviolent behavior, just for not listening, and also to have him eat his lunch in school detention for the last 3 months of the school year. Despite my protests and despite my requests for other options. So I know the Title I funding is there, but I don't believe that it's being used by the schools. And I think that the school board could take a closer look at how many children are in lunch detention, how many of those children could benefit from other methods. I know you're working on the sensory rooms, and I think that's a fantastic idea, but I think that there are so many children who need more help than they're getting, not only to be able to participate in band. The band for Jackson High is $250 to go to band camp, which I'm very thankful and blessed that I'm able to pay, but I'm sure that there are many parents who cannot. To look at all of those things and be sure that we are really looking, not just saying we have the funds and they're being used for this, but going into the schools and maybe observing how many students are in lunch detention, because it's a lot. How many are in after-school detention, and how many are being suspended rather than given opportunities to correct their behavior, or their parents being invited in to help correct their behavior. I actually volunteered to go to school with my student, which it says in the handbook is one of the things that should be tried before students are suspended, and I was told no. So I know that those things are in place in theory, but I think any parent in this district who has a child who doesn't fit into a certain mold, whether that's because of a disability, socioeconomic status, or the color of their skin, and doesn't fit a certain persona, would be able to tell a story about their child being marginalized. And some of that marginalization comes from money not being allocated and monitored and how it's being used in our schools. So that's not really a question, just a comment. Thank you for letting me speak.
All right. Please.
Hi, I'm Joni Orndello. I am from Jackson. My kids go to Jackson School, and I spoke on numerous occasions. I am a local attorney, and I do independent facilitation and special education mediation, so I'm in the schools quite a bit. Just a quick comment to piggyback on what she said. My daughter, who's in elementary school, goes to a smaller school in the Jackson Public School District. And one thing that I noticed is her field trip she goes on doesn't really relate to the grades and the lessons that they're learning. She was in 4th grade this last year, and I know a lot of her classmates, my friends and their children, have gone on trips like to Mackinac. This year she went to the zoo, and I think she's gone to the zoo several times, so it's just a repeat field trip that they've gone on. So I think that may be a social economic thing. So that's my comment on that. But my question about the budget is, when I've worked on several committees, I'm part of a lot of groups here locally, and because of my financial background, I work on a lot of budgets. And when we're doing a budget where we don't have a lot of information, we look at the current budget and what we budgeted for, and we compare what was budgeted with the actual, what was spent for that year. And I don't see that in this budget. So what I am asking is, did you look at the budget at the beginning of this year and the actual? It's normally called a budgeted versus actual for this current school year to create this school budget for next year.
Yep, so my budget process is I will look at whenever part time of the year in the spring where I start the next year's budget, I will look at um, what our current budget is, what we've spent so far, and I even go back and I look at the prior 2 years to get kind of some of that historical trend data, which typically is great. It's a little weird right now coming out of COVID, right? Things are just a little different. We do have a couple of years, worth of stuff now, but so yes, I do look at the last couple of years of what we've spent in different areas, and then we'll meet with people and what are your priorities for next year, because that historical data is great, but let's say a department or an area is going to make a major change, then that history is no good, right? And it just depends, and I don't have a specific example. Just those are some of the things that go into my thought process, and then where we think the state's headed with their budget and what the general feeling in Lansing happens to be at the time. That'll play a role in the projection. And again, the projected budget is just that. It's a wild guess. It becomes a lot clearer come September, October.
And I agree, that's the usual process. It's not as wild of a guess if you use the budgeted versus the actual, and you can do that for a couple of years, and then you have what's called a forecast. And then the other thing is, I believe that Mr. Doby's asked a question about what's cash versus investments, and what he was looking for sounded like a balance sheet. Do you use balance sheets?
We do use balance sheets. I think Mr. Doby was asking what part of our fund balance is cash, and fund balance is one of those things. So the best way I can explain fund balance is, if the district were to go out of business tomorrow, that fund balance is the difference after we paid all of our outstanding debts and sold all of our assets. That's what we would be left with at the end of the day. That includes cash, buildings, monies coming in that are due to us, monies going out that we owe to employees or vendors, and that is the highest level to explain fund balance. So cash investments is generally a part of it, definitely. And that is moving target day to day as our cash balance will change just because you're paying bills and things are being withdrawn and deposited every day.
Right, and that's all included on the balance sheet because the balance sheet is a snapshot of what was occurring on that day when you took that report, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. So those are the financial reports that I would normally do when I do a budget. I do have my background in accounting and a master's in tax, and I do these reports, so I understand what they are. But normally I would see those reports in a budget thing. So is that something that you would normally include?
You know, each district will present their budgets a little differently. This is how I've done it in the past. Other districts may do it differently or the same. You know, I'm always looking for new things. So if there's a better way or different way to do it, you know, I'm open to looking at different data and including it, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Marcus, on page 6 of the budget proposal, you have the 21-22 fiscal year actual, the 2022-23 amended as a approximation of where we're probably gonna land here, and then the 23-24 projected budget as a total, and then broken out by expenditures, I guess. I would guess that's kind of what.
Yeah, that'd be a little closer. And we have that 21, 22 information throughout all of the tabs, or a couple of them. I think on page 3 on the revenue summary, you'll see it as well, just to see our last completed year, the current year where we think we'll be, and then where we're projecting.
Guessing that's kind of what the speaker was talking
Yeah,
about.
that might be more similar to it, sure.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments on our budget at this time? Mr. Hastings and then Ms. Hamilton, if you'll defer, I'll call on you next. Thank you.
I have a quick question and then a comment. So my question for Mr. Leone is, so there's a lot of online data sources, websites where you can find school data of various kinds. And my question's concerning per student spending. So if I wanted to accurately determine per student spending at JPS, would it be simply a matter of just taking the net budget and dividing it by the student count, or is it a little more nuanced than that, where like obviously pieces like instructional support would go in and other pieces would not?
I mean, sure, high level, yeah, you can take that bottom total expenditures and divide it by our total ending student FTE count. That would give you a general per student expenditure amount.
Okay.
Now, depending on what information you're trying to glean from it, you could do, you know, if you want to know how much instruction, how many dollars of instructional expenses are we spending per student? So you would just look at the instructional piece and do the same math. It just, yeah, you can do that. It just depends on what you're using it for.
Do you have a formula that you use, or is that just something that's not relevant for you? But it is like a commonly used metric is per student spending.
So real quick, if you don't mind, our auditors provide that to the public. They provide it to the Board of Education every October. So you'll see that. In fact, it's posted on our website right now, and it'll break down the prior year's expenses per student instructionally and so on. It'll also show how JPS compares to other districts our size or our demographic.
And then I want to make a brief comment about discipline. Someone was mentioning, well, let me just share some experiences that one of my child has had at JPS this year. She was present, had a special needs, I don't know if that's the appropriate term, special needs student in her English class who threw a hardback book at her teacher's head. This student also threw a desk at her teacher. He was never suspended, number one. Number two, my child also witnessed 2 kids brawling, and I mean throwing hard punches at each other as classes, you know, between period 1 and period 2. A teacher got pulled into this and was, you know, was struck repeatedly. And in that second instance, those kids were back in the class in a matter of days. So all I'm saying is, if you think that disciplinary policies are too lenient at JPS, I really would care to differ. I think they're far more on the side of being less lenient. There's only so far you can go in that direction and maintain order. And I think it's probably safe to say that a lot of kids who are doing a lot of time in lunchtime detention in an earlier day probably would have, in an earlier era probably would have been suspended. So I really care to differ with the, the discipline is far too, harsh thesis. I just don't see that in reality.
Ms. Hamilton, you had a couple questions?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Okay. So I wanted to ask Julie, and, I don't know, Jeff, if you need to answer this as well, but, Julie, based on the questions that, Ms. Durrell was asking, the Title I funding, you said you all are starting to have conversations about how to try to make up for those kind of like those, school field trips and extracurricular activities. Have we ever done that before? It sounds like we've never really done that before. Is there a reason why? Is it like,
Because
we-
it's not related to the title funding, it's not related to it's related to the school, the fundraising that the school's doing with parents.
Mhm.
So that's where a lot of those dollars come from, is through fundraising. And so there is a disparity in some situations in some schools because some schools are able to raise money a little bit more easily than others. And so looking at how we can try to do something in a different way to make sure that things like field trips look similar in every building.
Yes, I think that's really was my question was kind of, so you answered the first part, thank you, that was perfect, just to kind of better understand that. So it does sound like that if we were to get creative, that there are some ways that we could, as a school, not necessarily using Title I funding, but looking at, our schools that bring in more money because of the economic demographics of that school, we could shift more money to these schools that are more marginalized for, band field trips and band costs and field trips, and it sounds like there's something that we could do, we just have to figure it out, or?
Maybe do our fundraising in a different way. Different types of fundraising. We probably can't shift the funds that are raised by parents at one school.
Nope, not funds that are raised by parents, I'm talking about
Yeah.
this within our, so I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to understand, is it even possible for us as a school to find funding from somewhere, not asking these parents, because we know they can't bring them, they can't bring it in. These parents, I don't know that it would be fair to take their money and put it over here. But
Right.
we as a school district, are we able to realistically find money somewhere to provide for the students in, these lower economic schools?
We've already seen some of that happening. There's a program, it's out at the Dahlem Center, that one of our schools used some of their title funding to make sure that I think it's fourth graders go to. And it's they go out several days out to the Dahlem Center and they do water studies and everything like that. So they saw another school was using their title funding to do that. So they are doing an educational field trip using their title funds that way. So there are ways that we can do that. And I think that we can, one of the things that when I said we're looking into it is looking at ways that we can maybe change the way that we do fundraising a little bit. Maybe do it, I can't really speak too much to that, but I mean, that's one of the things we want to explore is that, when we've got this disparity in fundraising that happens through, what some parents are able to raise and what some schools are able to raise, looking at how could we do fundraising differently too? So, because a lot of those funds, they're in order for us to, take the title funds that we have for a school and say we're going to send all students to Mackinac, using those funds would potentially mean that we're losing people that need to be in that building, that need to be there servicing kids with education. So that's not always going to be the answer, but we could look at just finding different ways to do fundraising so that it's more equitable. We wind up with more equitable results, maybe, is what I'm getting at.
So
Yeah, that makes sense. One more question though before you start, Jeff.
I just want to follow up on what you were just speaking to.
Well, I
'cause you-
think, well, let me ask, and then you might be able, it might still be what you're referring to. I think I'm really wanting to know, aside from fundraising, aside from Title I,
Mhm.
are there other ways that we can find money within our budget to say, because of these schools, because it makes sense, schools that receive Title I funding, clearly these schools need Title I funding. They need the extra teachers, they need, so we don't want to touch that because that will be pulling away from other areas. The idea of even searching for different ways to fundraise in these particular schools, there's only so much, I forget the way that my family used to say it, there's only so much juice you can squeeze out of a turnip. Like there's this unrealistic to think that, okay, whatever it is, that one. But, so are there other ways in our budget? Are there monies that we could say, this is for you know, these types of activities in these schools because we know there's no other way to get it. Is that possible? Is that the answer that you were gonna provide?
Well,
Actually, no, I was gonna reference the John George grant, which we receive every year. Funds specifically from John George that do support a variety of these types of activities. Currently, right now, John George is scholarshiped roughly 15, at least partial scholarships for students to go to Germany. So there are at-risk students, and these funds are up and down the board. So the answer to your question is we do grab other monies to be able to do that. The other piece, though, is that field trips are largely decided at the building level. Northeast Elementary, for example, likes to do a camp experience as opposed to a Mackinac experience, and that's a staff-driven decision. So there are pieces that you know, we simply support that local level of leadership as well, or that building level decision-making as well. So to answer your question, yes, there are other funds out there, and we work with our buildings to be able to provide that for situations that need. You know, ironically, we talk about Mackinac as one of those examples, and a number of years ago, you know, I was out in buildings and I was sitting down with fourth grade students, and half of the students went on the Mackinac trip, and the other half didn't. So I'm sitting down in the room and I'm talking to a student. I said, "Tell me about the Mackinac trip," because I hear it's like the best thing they've ever done in their life. And then the next student, literally in the same classroom, didn't have an opportunity to go. We literally changed how we required funding for that trip. If you were going to go to Mackinac, everybody got to go to Mackinac. So if the building opted for that as their field trip, everybody went. It wasn't one where those that had could go and those that didn't have couldn't go.
So Jeff, I want to just mention this as well, because I'm not sure that I'm quite getting the answer that I need or that I'm looking for. But I would like to see in our budget some kind of way, because even John George funds for Germany, which is amazing for those students who need to go. But most of the students that I am referring to in this moment, and that I think our speaker might have been referring to, are not people who are generally considering going to Germany. But I'm not done yet. So building level field trips are probably also largely decided based upon resources. So last statement, I would love to see us figure out a way to include costs that address the needs of our students who generally can't go and who just are under-resourced. You know, that's what I would like to see. And if there's a way possible outside of fundraising where we can't squeeze water from a turnip and outside of title funding, which is already completely used up, so that we can provide opportunities to students who generally are not able to go and do and da-da-da-da because of resources. I would like for us to figure that out. So yeah, that's it.
Ms. Hamilton, I just
Thank
want to
you.
make certain that I leave everybody with this assurance. There is no field trip in Jackson Public Schools that a student is denied going to because they do not have the funds.
Except they just don't have the funds and so they can't go. But, you know.
That's not accurate.
So you do have a way to send them. Is that what you're saying?
We do fund, everybody goes. So if the field trip is going, if a teacher's classroom is going on a field trip, everybody goes. It's not, I don't have money for the movie, so I can't send my kid to the movie. Everybody goes.
That's perfect, Jeff. Thank you for clarifying that. Maybe part of it is just a lack of a connection in the information. Maybe that's just where the problem is, that maybe these parents don't know how to get to those resources. So maybe that's something we should look into. So thanks for sharing that.
So on this topic, I will share that what Jeff said is true. I make sure that all my students know that if we have a field trip and we're going, money's not the problem. I just need to make sure I have permission from the parents. As far as the Northeast fifth grade camp experience, though, I will say that this year we couldn't raise the money and fifth grade didn't get to go. And because it is a large sum that we're asking these families, and we asked them to do like I think it's a $5 or $10 deposit, we had many students who didn't even do that. And I think it's because families know, well, I can't pay the 100, so why would I send the 5 in to even begin with? So just to back up what Keisha said, what Amy said, if we could keep exploring these options of other ways to raise the money so that we don't have a school like Northeast where no fourth graders or fifth graders are getting to go on any big trip. We did movies, we did all skate, we did do Lansing, which is a great one, but we're not getting to do a big one like Mackinac or camp because of money. If we could continue to explore options Because it's definitely, I think as soon as the paper comes home and parents see that it's $100, they're like, what? Even if they, because if you know anything about people in a low socioeconomic, even if they realize, well, I could pay $5 at a time and slowly get there, they see the big number and they just, hands up, can't do it. So I like that this conversation's happening, and I hope we continue to explore solutions for this.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a great challenge for, I know Phil's in the back to talk about a variety of different ways to support field trips and fundraising, because not every fundraiser looks the same. Not every fundraiser is an ask to please send in dollars. So there's a lot of other things that we can do. So thank you very much. Are there any other questions related to our budget at this time?
I just wanted to, if someone didn't see this, if you could just explain the $2 million decrease in instruction, where that money went to for the group.
Sure. So there was a, from this current year to next year, it lists or shows a $2 million decrease in instruction, which is a little deceiving. So what happened is, I think I mentioned a little bit about the underfunded pension liabilities that the state currently has for education. So what happened this year when, the state finalized their budgets, they're a little later than us even, and tax collections come in, they had, I forget the time of year, it was earlier in the winter, they had an updated appropriation, which sent money as a pass-through to schools and then onto the retirement system. So we recognize that revenue. We also have to recognize the expense as well. JPS's share was about $2.3 million, which we recorded in the instruction category, being that it's our largest category. We won't have that expense again next year as it's a one-time thing. So that shows a $2 million increase. But again, the money we received was about $2.3 million. So if we had not received that appropriation, our expenditures for instruction would have shown an increase of about $300,000 for next year. So sometimes things like that will be a little misleading or deceiving.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Hamilton?
So I didn't know if John was aware of what's going on. I don't know if he, so maybe we could make a plan what's going on. I don't know if he is trying to comment in this conversation or in the next one. Okay.
I
thank
got
you.
you. Thank you. All right, then hearing none, I will close the budget hearing for the 2023-2024 school budget. And Pam Fitzgerald, Ms. President, I will turn it over to you to call our meeting to order.
Thank you. And like has become my habit, I have a few things I want to say before we actually start the meeting that are just either reminders or FYIs. For public comment, we are doing 1 through 9, 5 minutes, 10 plus 3 minutes. We have 5 tonight, so we have a full 5 minutes without staying here until the morning. Filling out and turning in public comment slips must be done upon arrival of prospective speakers. So if somebody comes in that just gets here, feel free to let them know that they can still fill it out before. Let's see, board policies for use of social media as well as content not to be on public sites are clearly spelled out in board policy and Robert Rules of Order. A member has no right to explain his or her vote during voting, which would be the same as debate at such a time. So I think we got to really watch that. We don't do that. Public complaints. Please let people know that the president speaks for the board, the superintendent for the district. Refer public concerns or complaints that you can't just get a quick answer to, like, no, we don't have school Monday, something like that, to Jeff. So we get one voice coming out with one response that has the legal and the policy backing. And expectations for following parliamentary procedure. We're doing that more now, and we all have Robert's rules. Use the book. If you're confused, contact me. If I don't know, I'll contact our consultant directly. At the board level, Derek Dobies is an invaluable asset. So I'm sure he wouldn't mind clarifying if you had a question. Is that true, Derek? Am I speaking out of turn here? I may be speaking out of turn here. But Derek is quite the parliamentarian, so any extra help would be appreciated. All right, at this point, I would like to call our meeting to order. Thank you for attending. We have a good turnout again, and I do like that very much. And let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Michelle, will you do the roll call?
Ms. Hamilton,
Present.
Mrs. Brown, Mr. Dobies, Ms. Acton Dowell,
Here.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Here.
Ms. Hunt.
Here.
And Mrs. Fitzgerald.
Here. Okay, now I would like a motion to approve the agenda.
I actually would like to make a motion to amend the agenda
Okay.
to remove the superintendent employment agreement under number 11, old business. Mr. Beal's employment agreement has gone through all the appropriate steps. This contract was negotiated in good faith between the Board of Education and Mr. Beal. It was discussed and voted on in open session, and it has been voted on in each successive year while receiving effective and highly effective evaluations, including just months ago in December of 2022, when the board discussed this topic in open session, answered questions, and voted to extend Mr. Beal's contract through June 30th, 2027. Not only is this a disservice to our community to continually bring this up, but we as a board are putting ourselves in jeopardy of violating our own board policy, number 1662. Therefore, Mr. Beal has indicated his intent to file a hostile workplace complaint against the Board of Education for any attempt to publicly shame, bully, harass, or in effect renegotiate his contract outside of the bargaining process. It is in the best interest of this board to remove this item.
Support for discussion.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Oh, we do hear one? Lib?
Yeah. The reason that we brought this up wasn't to renegotiate Mr. Beal's contract. It was because we had so many questions from the public that they wanted answered, and so we want to clarify this for once and for all and be done with it. And that's why we brought it up, not to renegotiate his contract. We're aware that we can't do that.
Any other comments?
Yes, more comments.
Okay.
So, so a timeline of events, because harassment is a pretty serious charge to lay up on someone. And it's important for us to understand terminology when we're using it. So harassment is aggressive pressure or intimidation. That's the .com Google that you can look up, on your phone like I just did. I want to give you a timeline of the questions for this contract because I think it's important for you to understand the threats that this board has been receiving. So in December of 2022 is when myself and Libby realized that Jeff Beal was still receiving the $60,000+ extra duty pay. And the reason why we figured that out in December was obviously we're looking at his contract, but what we didn't, why it was so shocking to us at that time is because we hired and Jessica Carter's sitting over here right now, we hired a director of HR in August. So, and I'll chalk this up, I'll say for myself that, I wasn't paying very close attention to his budget at that time because we look at budgets once a year. So I didn't know that he was still receiving the pay. So in December, when we were looking at his contract to approve it or not, is when we discovered that he still had that extra duty pay in there, which is when all the questions came up. At that time, Jeff Beal mentioned some of the things that Angela shared, that, this was negotiated in good faith, and so I wasn't on the board when this was negotiated. Libby was on the board, and Libby had absolutely no knowledge, and I'll let her speak for herself, but she didn't know what had actually occurred, which was concerning to me because as a board member that she was, on the board at the time, and as a board member who sat on the Treasury Committee, I would assume that she would have been a part of those conversations. Anyways, though, so December, you all may or may not remember, I requested that we take that extra duty payout based on the fact that we have someone else who is who's doing the job of HR, and this board voted it down. Myself and Libby, like I mentioned, or I'll mention, did not agree with that. We voted no on that. In March of this year, so that was December 2022,
Madam
March
President,
of 2023,
point of order.
Libby
Point of order,
as
just
to-
clarified.
clarified. Libby
Just-
wanted to clarify.
Point of order.
Y'all see what we have to deal with?
If the trustee could direct her comments not to the entire history of this, but just to whether this should appear on the agenda or not. I think
Exactly.
would be appropriate.
This is not time for discussing that. It's appearing on the agenda.
Oh, we're gonna discuss it in a minute?
We're,
Appearing on the agenda.
Because we asked for discussion, right? Was this discussion time or no?
They're not for going back to.
But is
a-
this
a year
discussion
back.
time?
Not for this.
So it is discussion time or it isn't?
Apparently not.
as to whether it's, we're going to be talking about it on the agenda.
Discussion time. Thank you. I appreciate that. I thought so. So anyways, in March of this year, Libby clarified, how do we get things on the agenda? Because we had no true process for getting things on the agenda. Once it was clarified that you just need to let the board know in March, let the board know, then it will come on the next agenda. So Libby let her know in, I think, April, and said, hey, look, I'd like this on the agenda. And so in May, if I'm not mistaken, in April. So in April, we put it on the agenda the first time. Libby got sick. And then May, when Libby was coming back, she said, put it back on the agenda. And we got a threat of harassment, which we don't understand. Because all we wanted to do was, like I said, ask questions to try to better understand what was actually going on. Anyways, so now here we are, when Libby's finally back and able to get the conversation back on the agenda, here we are having this conversation, which is a problem that, we have to go through all these hoops in order to have this conversation about what is going on with this contract. How did it happen that you are allowed to, be the superintendent, earn an extra income for a HR position that's already been filled, and then also get paid extra duty to oversee it when it seems like that would be a part of your role. So
Point of order, I
so
call
we
the
are
issue.
concerned
That's
about,
the end of discussion, Keisha, call the issue.
we are concerned about
Period.
these things.
Okay,
And
the
don't fully
motion's on the
understand them.
table
So
to
those are the questions,
delete
folks,
the
that we have
one-
out there.
Delete another discussion of Jeff's contract as we go year by year. The motion is to delete it from the agenda. All in favor of deleting it from the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Let's do a roll call. Let's do a roll call, just to be sure.
Ms. Hamilton,
No.
Mrs. Brown,
No.
Mr. Dobies? Mrs. Acton Dowell,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Ms. Hunt,
No.
and Mrs. Fitzgerald.
Yes. The motion has passed. We will delete it from the agenda. Thank you.
Now we need approval of the revised agenda.
Okay. I would like a motion to approve the revised agenda.
Before you do, I have one more edit that we need to make. In the minutes on, let me see. We listed that Ms. Hunt said something that she didn't say. Under the action items for last month in the minutes, 2223129, Ms. Hunt was not here last month. That was Ms. Hamilton who relayed that information. I like that edit made. Thank you. That's in the minutes from last month.
Yeah, just the wrong name was put in there. And that can be corrected, absolutely.
It's on page 3, 2 of 3. Number 1 under action items.
So we'll make,
I got it, yep, I'll correct those minutes for the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, now we're back to approval of the agenda. I'd like to hear a motion to do so.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Hamilton,
What are we voting on right now?
on the amended agenda.
You just wanted the
Yes.
other amendment.
Mrs. Brown,
No.
Mr. Dobies, Mrs. Acton Dowell,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Ms. Hunt,
Yes.
and Mrs. Fitzgerald.
Yes. Motion's passed. Let's go on. From this point, we get the superintendent's report. Jeff?
All right, so a couple things just real quick. We're going to pass this over to Chris to talk about our laundry initiative. But I want to simply acknowledge our staff for a great year, acknowledge those staff that are continuing to work for summer school, and just tell everybody, hey, look, we look forward to having you back next fall.
Great, thank you. I have representatives here from American One Credit Union to present a check to Jackson Public Schools for our laundry initiative. A couple years ago, there was a group of a committee that I was part of that we started to fund, first put laundry facilities in every single one of our schools to help with our community closets and any issues during the school day that students run into, to help with uniforms, things like that. We had such a great response from the community donating dollars to fund those washers and dryers. We also had a community foundation fund set up for us as well that is slowly developing and adding money to. We also got a grant from Whirlpool for two of our schools to have washers and dryers. And the continued need is still there. And month after month, there's also laundry supplies. So we are grateful to our community support and members like American One, who provides us with extra dollars to provide laundry soap, softener, bags, all the things that you can think of that go along with doing laundry to help our students during the day. So I would like to present them here with us tonight.
Good evening. I'm Christy Edgar. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Operations Officer for American One Credit Union. And I'm also a board member of Community One Co-op, which is kind of the overarching organization for American One Credit Union. And I have several board members here with me to present this check. We're excited to be able to support such a wonderful program for the school system, and we look forward to future partnerships. So thank you. And if we could have maybe a couple or all the board join us for a photo, we'd appreciate that.
Oh, you stand behind us, just for viewer, okay.
Actually, if we could get the board just to stand for the photo ops, I think it'll look good if we're all together as opposed to.
Oh, there you go. There we go. There we go. Multiple, you know.
One more.
We'll share, Chris.
Yes, we'll share.
Chris.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
I think we should clap. Thank you, American One.
Absolutely a vital service for our students. Thank you very much for
Absolutely.
your support. Next up, we're going to have Julie and Jeremy talk to us about our 98B report. So Julie, Jeremy, I'm not sure which one wants to go first, but I'll let you guys tag in as needed.
I can kind of kick us off. Just this is something that we wind up looking at least twice a year. And what we're looking at is benchmark assessment data. And so it's part of the law that we need to make sure that we are doing benchmark testing twice a year, actually 3 times a year. And so we do it in the fall. And we have been, this year we decided to use NWEA testing. And NWEA is an adaptive test. So students take it and it gives them questions that depend on how they did on previous questions. And so by the end of that, they get a score, and then it sets a goal for them for the year. So students that score at this, at each of those different, what they're called rate scores, they have this normative data that says that kids that usually score at that level, they'll make this much growth in a year. And so every student has a growth score for mid-year, and then also a goal for them to meet at the end of the year. And so what we look at with our data at the middle of the year is what percentage of kids have hit their growth goal for the mid-year. And then we look again in June when school gets out, and we look at students who have hit their growth goal for the end of the year. And so that's what you'll see each of the sheets that is on the cover sheet that you've received there. It's sort of a dashboard for all of the schools. When you look at that, Table A shows the goals that were set by the buildings. Table B shows the students and the percent of students who met their goal, and that's disaggregated by the student group. And Table C shows the percent of students who met the goal by grade level. And you should see that for all buildings K through 8, the law covers benchmark assessment testing for grades K through 8, and then for 9 through 12, they have a little bit more leeway about how they demonstrate the growth for the year.
Okay, secondary, middle school at Parkside and 4th Street Learning Center look very similar to elementary. They use NWEA and have the fall, winter, and spring assessments where they're measuring a year's growth in a year's time or better. High school looks a little bit different. They're monitoring their state level data, which is still embargoed at this time, so they're not able to compare where they were last year and share that information at this time. So one thing that they added was our students staying on track for graduation. So you'll see the success rate of students passing each grade, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and then how students are doing in their senior year. So that's an important item to look at because the end in mind is graduation as well as proficiency. So that is what we have to share for the secondary level. And then SCMV is 100% virtual. The students do use NWEA, but they are using it from home. And so they have mixed results. It's a very transient population in virtual land where sometimes they may start the school year there but not finish it. So you will not have a year's growth because they're not there for a full calendar year. And sometimes students come in halfway through the year. So again, they don't have an established goal because they weren't there the majority of the year. So they only take the test twice, once in the beginning and once in the spring. So the data reflects the students that were there for a full calendar year.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Jeremy or Julie with regards to NWA or our progress? And if not, that will conclude the superintendent's report for the month of June.
Okay, now we move on to the consent agenda. I'd like to call for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Deliberation, consent agenda. Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Now we're going on to the citizens requesting to address the board. And we only have 5 today, so we will have the full 5 minutes rather than having to reduce it for many, many, many. We'll start with Kalia Jamison and then Cheryl Simonetti. The button on the right-hand side. There you go.
Y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kalea. I'm currently an 11th grader at SCMV. I attend SCMV because Jackson High refused to provide me with a safe learning environment. My first days at SCMV were the hardest. I didn't know how to use Odysseyware. They just handed me my computer and didn't tell me how to get to my classes or anything. So I was stuck for weeks with no help. I had to go to Rise Above to learn how to use Odysseyware program. Rise Above is a private program that helps students succeed. I went there for a whole school year and I was doing great. Rise Above helped me get caught up on all my schoolwork. The following year, I decided I was ready to leave Rise Above and comfortable doing Odysseyware on my own. I was doing great until count day came up. I missed a count day email and I was locked out of Odysseyware for nearly 2 weeks. They basically kicked me out of the program. If it wasn't for my mom, I would still be kicked out. Not a single one of the teachers reached out to me prior to count day. I had never had a parent-teacher conference at SCMV for my parents to attend. I feel like none of the JPS teachers at SCMV care about us students. All they care about is counting us for count day and money. They could care less if a kid is struggling or not. As long as they are getting money, that's all that matters. I was fortunate enough that I could go to Rise Above. What about the other students who can't go to Rise Above? What are they supposed to do? They just get to sit there and struggle while SCMV does nothing to help them but collect their money. I have friends who have been sent to SCMV due to the behavior contracts at Jackson High, and the same thing happened to them. They were given a computer and basically forgotten about. This is not right. This is not fair. My friends and I deserve help, and we deserve our education. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Kalia. Cheryl Simonetti and then Danita Bentley.
Good evening. I wanted to discuss the topic of Robert's Rules of Orders. There seems to be some confusion on the board as to the use of Robert's Rules. And if you look at the bylaws, Board Policy 0161 specifically states that the parliamentary authority governing the Board of Education shall be Robert's Rules of Orders. The current policy is dated back to 2015 with Neola, but I'm pretty sure it existed on the books prior to that. Ms. Fitzgerald has been telling you since January that she is going to be following Robert's Rules of Orders. Every president on the board implements meeting strategies differently, but Mrs. Fitzgerald has been doing the work. Like any new board member who reviews policies so that they know what their role is, Mrs. Fitzgerald has been reviewing policies to know what the role of the president is. She has attended the Michigan Association of School Boards educational opportunity for new presidents, along with an educational opportunity on Robert's Rules of Orders. She's not pulling things out of nowhere. There are no loose Robert's Rules. I mean, just look at her book. It is full of tabs and notes, and I'm going to guess that there's a lot of highlighting and turned corners. She's doing the work. At the same time, I would like to commend Mr. Dobies for his obvious familiarity with Robert's Rules and his attempt at establishing decorum at these meetings. I think that it would behoove the board to take advantage of Mr. Dobies' experience and name him as parliamentarian because that is the role that he has been fulfilling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Simonetti. Danita Bentley. Followed by Joni
Good evening.
Orendello.
Oh, sorry.
After. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Most of you probably know some of what I'm going to say because it's a repeat, but I'll keep coming till I see or hear something different. So I'm here to ask again, what is our DEI plan and what are we doing to create one? If we are not in the process of actively creating one, then we shouldn't be advertising on our website that we are DEI or that we are pursuing it. I know that we've made some steps to progress towards being more DEI, but until we have an actual outline, a plan, something that's in process, something that board members, admin, staff, and community members have had a part in, then we can't claim that we're actually doing it. I feel like we're doing it to the point that we can check the box and say that we're doing it, but we don't really mean to do it. If we really mean to do it, then we would be looking at the systems that serve our students, because we have way too many students falling through the cracks. I had students in my very own classroom that I fought all year long for who are falling through the cracks and going on to next year with nothing different. And when I ask, so I teach 4th grade, I ask, what happens when they go to Parkside and we've done nothing for them? And the answer I get is, I don't know. That's not okay. We're not serving our students the way we should be if that's what's happening. We have systems that need fixed. And if we're really going to do DEI, those systems would get fixed. My next thing, I emailed all of you about the end of the year surveys. I heard back from 3 of you. I would really press upon all of you to ask for those surveys, the survey responses, and not just the summarized versions, but make it some of your summer reading. You all asked to be elected for these positions, so you should spend some of your free time reading what staff members and the family surveys have to say about the district. I know it would be a lot of reading, but I don't feel like it's too much to ask for an elected position that you chose to be in. I know that a thought exchange has been started for at least the staff about the survey results, because as it was said in the email we received, it's obvious that a lot of staff members do not feel supported. And so I think a thought exchange is a great place to start. My fear is that we're going to do a thought exchange for a short period of time. Admin's going to try and put Band-Aids on a couple things and call it good. My hope is that the thought exchange goes through the summer and into the fall, because you've got to know that teachers are done. They are checked out. They are tired. They are recovering. For the past 2 weeks, I've felt like a college student who comes home on break and just wants to sleep because it's a mental release of everything we've been through. So I would hope the thought exchange would go through the summer and into the fall to give teachers a real chance to dig into that. I hope that you all will read the survey responses and participate in or at least read the thought exchange. And I hope the thought exchange is followed up with in-person listening sessions, because there are people who will not go online and participate in the thought exchange, but they may come and sit at a meeting with you. Or better yet, if admin and a few board members showed up to staff meetings at every building and held some of that time aside for listening sessions about the things that were said in the survey, you will get responses there that you won't get in the thought exchange. And so I really hope that you spend some of your summer doing that, and that you care enough to actually read those responses from the staff members. Another question I have is, one of our mottos, logos, whatever you want to call it, is where community comes together. And if that's true, I would like to know why we are not doing more to partner with community agencies to help us with DEI, to help us with restorative justice, to help us with systems change, because there are experts right here in our community who have been doing this for years. And there are experts right here in this community that have been doing it who have offered help to admin, and it's not been accepted. So if we're where community comes together, we're not the source of all of it. If we're where community comes together, then we are also willing to accept the help from community that's being offered. We also need to accept help from community on better servicing our students, because there are lots of services out there that if they could have an integrated relationship with us in our buildings, we could better serve a lot of our students. And if we are where community comes together, how is it that we have a school that is not allowed to have a parent involvement committee? That's not what I've heard from parents who have started coming to me since I have started speaking out at these meetings. I've been told that they have been told they are not allowed to have a parent involvement committee, and that there's not one. So I will put that out there to be explored. And then real quick, to comment on what 2 comments were said about experiences in the school with discipline, things that have been seen and experienced by parents. I'm also a parent of a child at Parkside who's been suspended. He needed suspended. He got consequences at home. But I will speak to both of these people. They're both true. They're both 100% accurate. And I hope that they can see that amongst each other, because the real problem is we're not consistent. And we don't have, our system needs work. Again, I talked about systems change. We need more restorative justice. Also, there are times when students are doing things as a teacher where I'm like, excuse me, they did what yesterday and they're here today? Are you kidding me? But then there's other times where I'm like, wait, I didn't want that kid suspended. And I know there's a lot of gray areas and it's hard to figure out, but this comes back to my point of why we really need DEI work and why we really need help with restorative justice and systems change, because both of these stories are 100% accurate, and I feel the frustration of both of them as an educator in the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Joni. Followed by John King.
Okay. The main thing I was going to talk about is SCMV, but as usual, there are things that come up in the meeting. First, I want to address Robert's rules. And Pam, you have brought it up because it is in the policy. It is the rules that are supposed to be followed, and that's true. And I see you have your book, you distributed books to everyone, and that's good. A good leader also makes sure that their team is informed. Last meeting, I think Derek Dobies, he did call to question. I looked up the rule. There's supposed to be a second. There wasn't a second. So that was a mistake that Mr. Dobies did, and it was used to actually quiet Ms. Hamilton. I look at the rules and make sure that they're followed strictly. And Robert's rules are supposed to be inclusive, not exclusive, and they're being used to be exclusive. And that's not equitable, and it's not fair. So I think that when people join the board, and if their board policy is to follow Robert's rules instead of just handing out a book and enforcing them, the board should go through a training to learn them. Because Robert's rules, looking at your book, that's a lot to learn.
That's the whole.
It's a lot. And looking through them, was overwhelmed. As an attorney, and the rule books I'm looking at are a lot. So it's a lot to learn and to implement immediately when nobody's gone through a training. So for it to be fair for everyone to follow them at the last minute, even that is, I actually have a little pamphlet that's laminated as a quick reference, and it's still a lot. It's a lot to implement last minute, especially when there was board norms discussed and people indicated that they wanted to be heard, and there was limitations on how much they can comment. So I'm not trying to be mean or critical or anything, but it's a lot for people to have to do at the last minute. The other thing I wanted to comment was about the agenda. It wasn't just Ms. Brown and Ms. Hamilton that wanted to discuss the contract. When we're talking about funds for schools and we're talking about whether it was negotiated fairly, what happened at the December meeting was that 2 board members were excluded from those negotiations in the review. 2 board members that the public supports. So it wasn't just them being excluded from those negotiations and that conversation, it was everybody that supports them that was excluded. All the public community members that follow them, that wanted those discussions, were excluded. And I'm gonna ask right now, everyone to stand up that wanted that on that agenda. So this is everyone who you guys just denied the opportunity to have that discussion. And that doesn't include everyone that's at home. Angela, you got to read all your reasoning for excluding it, and you cited a board policy, which is the anti-harassment policy. And the anti-harassment policy cites the criteria for harassment. Most of it relates to disabilities and discrimination based on classes of people. And it has a very specific reason for harassment for it to be completed. And then when Ms. Hamilton was describing the history, they tried to use Robert's rules to shut her down with that description. But that history was important to the discussion. So you allowed Angela to say her reasons why it should be removed, but then you tried to shut up Ms. Hamilton. And that was exclusive. So that's something that you guys should consider. A lot of times when I come to these board meetings, I see things that look like bullying. It looks like discrimination or implicit bias at a minimum. And that's something that the students who come here, I brought my daughter, both my daughters here. And when I bring them here, you guys are an example for them and students in the school district. And if they're seeing you behave like that, then that's an example that they're gonna go back and do in the classroom. And it's disappointing, very disappointing. Now, the thing that I came to talk about was this last month, there was a graduation. And I had to watch my friends see all their kids graduate, and I didn't get that. You know, it marked a year from my daughter being denied graduation. So I pulled up the civil rights complaint that I filed that Miss Baker complete it, and I read it. And she was denied because of a board policy. It was board policy 5460. Will include students who have successfully completed requirements as certified by the high school principal. No student was allowed to walk in commencement unless they completed their coursework. Ms. Sullivan, who is a social worker, was unaware of the policy when she spoke to Joni Orndello on March 27, 2022. Both parties agreed that Autumn's 504 should have been updated, and both agreed that this was not done when she started at SCMV. Ms. Sullivan was not aware that the option to test out existed. Thus, the option was not offered until June 2022. Autumn did not complete all the coursework by May 27th and was
I'm
not
sorry,
allowed to walk.
your time. Thank you. John King.
John, can you grab it's the right button on the microphone there.
Yeah.
I'm John King. I live at 203 3rd Street here in the city, a couple blocks away from here. I apologize. I just had time to write notes, not give a clear, concise statement. As far as the curriculum delay, that having some teachers come and say, "Oh yeah, it's going to be a great job," it wasn't necessarily necessary. I know there's actual businesses and everything that deal with curriculums, developing them. It's been a topic in the news at least the last year or two. When Keisha Hamilton was running, she said, she wanted to address the curriculum. I sort of knew what that meant. And, I'm sure what that meant is, and she has criticized and others have criticized the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, for not having separate African American or Black American history. And I understand that because Black American history or African American history is part of U.S. history. We shouldn't be segregating, by race, the history books. Also regarding Keisha Hamilton, after last board meeting, I watched a video of hers that might have been like 3 minutes or so, and she was criticizing board members Pam Fitzgerald and Derek Dobies. Essentially, I know she was talking about Pam Fitzgerald, maybe Derek Dobies, calling them, a Karen, definitely sort of a racist tone and everything like that. Bringing up white tears, that maybe Pam Fitzgerald is crying and using some political strategy of being a white woman crying to advance her agenda or something. Just sort of a really disgusting political or racist type deal. That occurred there was the 6-month pregnant white woman, a month and a half back, that was running a bike. Some young Black men tried to steal it. The woman's attorney came out with the receipt afterwards, and so there were a lot of lies and blaming of the white woman, and part of that was that it was sort of white tears. So hopefully, maybe we can get away from all that stuff. Keisha mentions that she's a racial healing practitioner, and from what I see, it's kind of just the opposite. I believe she has been harassing Superintendent Jeff Beal. If you were to get the greatest superintendent in the country to come here, maybe even if they were Black, and insist on insisting on being called doctor, you won't see any great improvements in in attendance or a lot of other things. I mentioned a lot of times the out of wedlock birth rate, and it definitely, there's the politics that say, "Oh no, that doesn't play an issue." There's so many social issues involved with the problems with the school district, but for them to have so many high achieving students and other things, yeah, I think that's an testament to the school district and Superintendent Jeff Beal. But you know, we get this racist politics and everything like that, and unfortunately, so many others, you know, behind me and in other meetings that just support, you know, Keisha Hamilton with all this really disgusting, you know, claims and everything like that. So hopefully, you know, we can get by that. I kind of doubt it. You know, I think they're going to keep insisting on it. But thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Before we go on, I want to make certain I go back. I should have done this earlier, and I apologize. Christina Lundberg is here. She is our Director of Transportation. She jumped in as an interim role for us in February. Is it February? I don't want to get it wrong. And has done an absolutely fabulous job. So if we could just welcome Christina to the district.
Welcome.
Thank you so very much.
I've heard wonderful things. One of the biggest complaints I think that we get most often anyway is about transportation. Phones are silent. I love it. You're doing a great job. Thank you. Okay. Discussion items, elementary handbooks, the common pages. Julie can present this item if you'd like to. I can just say it.
I don't think there are any changes. I don't think there are any
There's no
changes. with the
Are there
common
any
pages
changes
this year.
except the ones that are required by law? I didn't think so.
We did not make any
So
changes.
elementary has no changes from
No.
this year?
No.
Okay. We'll end up voting on this next month, people, so if you have any questions, holler. Secondary handbooks, common
Is this
pages.
a
Jeremy.
discussion item?
Pardon me?
Is this a discussion? It's me, Pam, back down here. Is this a discussion item, the handbooks?
It can be, there's another change, so.
These are the common pages.
Right, but it's a discussion item. We didn't open the floor for discussion. Are we opening?
You want a discussion?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Thank you.
absolutely.
All right, so it looks like, Julie, maybe you get to get these questions, sounds like, I don't know.
For elementary.
Yes, actually, so these questions are for both of them. And for the community's benefit, I don't ask questions always for my own benefit. Sometimes I ask them because I just want to be able to educate the community as well. So some of these questions are for that. I want to understand, what are the common pages? I think it'd be a good idea for them to know what those are.
Oh, the common pages are, they are a section of every building's handbook that is common throughout the district. So there are pages that in the handbooks that are very specific to buildings. So they have the teachers listed, their contact information, their hours, you know, different things that are specific to that building. But the common pages you'll find in the handbooks for all buildings.
Okay, and the purpose of the common pages are for the community to know?
They are just information about the district and about various policies that are important for all parents to know.
Okay. Are they different or alike? How are they different or like board policies? Different from or alike to board policies?
I would say that some board policies are alluded to, but there are other things like you'll find code of conduct is in there. You'll find transportation information, what the rules are for transportation, and in terms of where the walk zones are, things like that. Who the people are to contact at transportation, those types of things. Just it's sort of like information that it's really important for families to know and to be able to find.
So do they align with board policies or no? Like, so I'm really wondering, with the common pages, it sounds like the major differences that they'll find are maybe like the admin of the school, the hours of the school.
Yeah.
So going from school to school, say, let's just say elementary to elementary, students going from elementary to elementary, for the most part, the meat and potatoes of it should be similar?
They should be very similar, yeah. I mean, there's things that'll be different. Like I said, the hours, different scheduling things that'll be different from school to school. Just things that may be different about the way that a school does certain things. It's hard to speak to them, but they'll all cover things like medication authorizations and who to see specifically, so that it's sort of the difference between just a generalized Like your common pages are pretty general, with the exception of they tell you who to contact for district things. Like if you needed to contact, like I said, somebody in transportation. The building pages are very specific to the people that work in that building and who to see and how things are done, basically, what their calendar looks like for the year, when their lunches are, their bell schedules for secondary, those types of things.
2 more questions for you.
Mhm.
One, and I think I asked this, and I might need to ask it a different way. Do they align with board policy? So and this is second question to that one. If a person, parent, teacher, student, whoever, gets a hold of the comment pages and they're reading through it and you know, they want to say, hey, look, you know, this is what this says, da, 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 da. Should they fairly, you know, reasonably expect that those policies that are within the comment pages will also be reflected in the board policies? Or do they need to look at both of those to see if they, you know?
Yes, we make an effort to make sure that when board policy changes, that we're making the updates to the common pages.
Awesome.
And that's one of the things we look for when we look for changes each year, that, you know, if something's happened in the meantime with board policy, we're trying to make sure that that's reflected.
Perfect. So it sounds like comment pages should be a reflection of board policies.
For the most part, yeah. They
Last
should
question
be.
for you. If the community, and thank you for answering all the other ones, if the community wants a printed copy, because I think we put these online, if they want a printed copy, what do they need to do to get those?
They could just reach out to the school. The school can
Get them a
print
printed
them.
copy?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
definitely.
Madam Chair, I'll just note that the current common pages, I believe, reflect changes at least to the tobacco policy as changed by this board in April, and numerous of the other policies, for those that have read the common pages, actually have hyperlinks to our board policies right in the common pages.
Thank you. Yes, the only changes this year are the ones that are mandated, like the more rigorous tobacco policies and things like that, that we don't come up with. They come to us.
Are there any other questions on the elementary comment pages? And then I think, Derek, you kind of stole Jeremy's thunder, because I think the comment pages for the secondary are all the same with the exception of the update to the tobacco policy. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think they've been highlighted too, so it'll stand out a little bit.
Good.
One last question for the comment pages. Do the schools, and I should have asked this probably first, the schools that get these, you know, that each of our schools that receive this comment pages that we have, when they're creating their separate school policies, should we expect them to align with the comment pages?
Yes. Yeah,
What-
you shouldn't see any variation away from board policy.
So I'm gonna guess that when they don't see them aligned, and that's when they come to you, Jeff? What happens then?
Sorry, say that question again.
When they don't align,
They-
where should they go?
Do they not align ever?
They can't.
Madam
A building is not allowed to adopt policy that's not in alignment with the board policy. So you can't have a board or a building level handbook that's not consistent with board policy.
Madam President?
Thank you.
Yes.
Just looking at this, and Jeremy, Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, these are both templates that schools will use. There's a blank page in here for the letter from the president, from the principal, and then there are school staff departments that'll be placed in here for each school.
Yeah.
There's school hours and a schedule for each school to be placed on this page. And then other building-specific information, maybe about drop-offs, stuff like that, access to the school, whatever, will be school-specific. The rest of the stuff, JPS mission, vision, policies, all of that is the same across the entire district. Thank
So
you.
what you're saying, Mr. Dobie, is that no policies are really included except the common policies. The common pages contain the board or the school, whatever, elementary policies. And the things that are specific to the school are not so much policies as practices, protocols, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, even the elementary tobacco policy was also updated for the elementary book, yeah. So, for the common pages for the elementary handbook. So, I mean, these are just reflective of our current board policies, and then, you know, the schools get to sub in stuff that is, pertains to their operation of their school specifically.
A lot of logistical things are what are the things that are building specific.
Are there other questions from the board? And obviously, this is a discussion item, so if you have, the reason we put the items on for discussion, it gives you a month to kind of chew through it, make sure that you get a deeper dive. If you've got specifics on any given language within the comment pages, I would refer you to Jeremy and Julie. They will be bringing these back before the board for adoption in July. And again, it's the same stuff that we adopted a year ago with a few minor updates. No other questions? That's what I've got for.
Okay. We're on to number 9, action items. Our first action item is 22-23-145, and it's the 22-23 final budget amendment. Marcus?
All right, so we're presenting the 22-23 final budget amendment for your review, discussion, and approval. Again, the state has until the end of their fiscal year, which is September 30th, to adjust per pupil count. This budget amendment was reviewed with the Finance Facility Committee at our June meeting. So one thing I will point out here as we look on the second page or on the attachment, right now we are projected to end the year adding almost $4.5 million to fund balance to get us to that $15 million mark. Again, this is a projection of where we think we'll wind the year up at. We're still closing out our books, which will be audited over the summer, and we will be presenting the final numbers in the fall. So at this time, we would just recommend approval of the final budget amendment for 22-23.
Move approval of the 2022-23 final budget amendment as presented.
Support.
Aye.
Thank you. Watch me on that. 22-23-146, and it's the 23-24 budget adoption. So, Marcus again.
Point of order.
Yes.
Madam Chair. I appreciate Marcus and his explanation on all of this stuff. I might recommend that we take motions first on these things, a motion in a second, to be able to
Before Marcus presents.
have a motion on the floor instead of Marcus going into a whole discussion on the item and providing information. If there's no motion on the floor for any of this stuff, then it doesn't make sense to hear about it and debate.
Okay,
it
so what
and
you'd
stuff.
like to do is have the motion to approve, call for support, and then the discussion would really be Marcus's.
If
Any
you know,
objection
if people want to
that?
have discussion on it, I mean,
So,
I've read the packet. You can, you know, if people have questions for Marcus, then
so
maybe
Derek,
that's appropriate.
do you mind just explaining to the board, is this a preference or is this the way that Robert's rule normally works? It'd be
It's
nice to know that.
generally how Robert's rules work.
So
to
this is
keep
a
the meeting
correction
going.
kind of, that we call it, have somebody second it, and then the discussion.
Yep, and if
that
there's no
occurs.
motion, then
Okay.
it
Then he doesn't need to
fails
have a
and
conversation.
we move on to the next item. Yep.
So if we're following Robert's rule, then that would be the proper way to do it.
Yep.
Okay,
Good to
so we're
know.
going to a motion to approve and then support without really knowing the information we're approving and supporting? That's-
Because a
for
motion
discussion.
is to, yep,
Just
to
for
be able
discussion.
to
Okay.
say, I would like to, you can make a motion without supporting something as well. You can
Yeah,
second
that's
something
fine.
for discussion without necessarily
No problem.
saying you're going to vote for it. So
Okay,
that being said, I'll make a motion to adopt the proposed millage rate as well as the 23-24 budget resolutions, including general food service, student activity, debt service, and capital projects as presented.
support.
Support.
Okay, Marcus?
All right, so every year the Board of Education is required by law to adopt a balanced budget prior to the beginning of the fiscal year. Earlier tonight, we held our public hearing as required to receive testimony and discuss the proposed budget. Again, you have the summary of the millage rates that we discussed earlier tonight. And in this item, you have the official budget resolutions outlining the amount of revenue coming in, our fund balance, and how we plan to appropriate those funds for each of the 5 funds listed there. So at this time, we would request approval for the 23-24 budget resolutions.
Deliberations? Got a motion and a second? We go ahead and vote. You want to do roll call or just? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, the Neola policies. This is the second reading and it's for adoption. And this is Jeff's. You'll explain that to them.
I'll move final
Let's-
adoption
I
of
was
the
going to say, we need a motion.
I'll move final adoption of policy updates as presented.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Jeff, explain, discuss.
All right, this is obviously our second look. The policy subcommittee had an opportunity to go through these policies in the end of April. So they've been with you now for quite some time. Obviously, you'll see them lumped into several categories, but they deal specifically with, and I'll kind of go through them just so we can get through it. There's some student assessment updates that are required. These are all required by law, so the changes that were brought forward are specific to requirements that we have with regards to law. So you'll see updates to student assessment. You'll see updates to how we spend federal grants. You'll see updates regarding school safety and school safety zones. But again, the board has had these in your hands for a couple months now, so if you have questions on a specific policy, I'd be happy to address those, but it would be the recommendation of superintendent and I believe our policy committee to adopt these policies as presented.
Okay, we've had a motion to approve. We've had a second. Any deliberations on Neola policies? No? Okay, none heard. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Okay, it passes. Thank you. Okay, continue on to item 22-23-148, the SCMV lease.
Move adoption of the lease as presented.
As presented. Second?
Second.
Okay, second. Now we need to have some deliberations on this. Anybody have a question about the SCMV thing?
Yes. So I have some comments on it.
Are we doing Marcus' presentation first?
We're doing presentation first?
Okay.
Are we doing a presentation first? No, are we? You could answer the question.
Only if necessary,
If
Ms. Hamilton.
necessary. We didn't know if we
If you
needed
have
a-
questions though, please feel free.
Okay. So with SMV, this lease, and I hope the community remembers the conversation from last month, since he's not doing an update. So I'm struggling with SCMV. I love the idea of us having this virtual option that's directly connected to JPS versus something like K-12, which is also good in its own right. So I like the idea of the virtual option, because of COVID, different people, found that that online format might be better for them for whatever reasons. I'm not confident, though, that we're receiving accurate information related to the actual needs of SCMV, the necessity of the space. I'm not sure we receive accurate information as to why it's exploding, the different ways that students are being referred or ending up there. I'm really concerned about kindergartners, being forced over into SCMV based on what some parents have shared. I do feel like the space is too large, and I feel like the contract is too long. So for those reasons, I will be voting no on this policy, action item.
Okay. Oh, Lib.
I also have a concern about SCMV and how the students are arriving there. I'd like to know more about the criteria for putting students there. It seems like we should be trying to enroll more students in the basic high school rather than putting all our focus on SCMV and expanding that.
Do we have any test scores to see how they're doing? Where would I find that?
So we can get that for you. It should be on their site, as well as we just shared some data today. And they have other data points regarding, credit status, similar to how Jackson High presented on how kids are, progressing through, especially at the secondary level. But they have to take the same state assessments as well. And so those are embargoed currently and then will be released. But we have last year's state assessment data as well.
So is it K through 12 kindergartens? Kindergarten really?
That's
goes-
correct.
Wow.
Do the lower grades primarily learn online, or do they come physically into the facility most often?
Both. They probably access coming to the space more if their parents are able to bring them in. I know they have a literacy specialist and works a lot with the students in small group instruction. And so I would say that percentage-wise of students, that the lower L students come in more frequently. All students are welcomed into the space multiple days a week by appointments and just dropping in, which is why we need a larger space.
Absolutely.
So numerous times I've been over there seeing the youngsters there, and most recently at kindergarten graduation.
One more question, building off of what Marilyn asked you. Do we have data specific to SCMV as far as their socioeconomic status and the racial demographic breakdown, just specific to SCMV? I'd like that information. When you send Marilyn hers, if you could send the same thing to me. Both
Okay,
of those.
so you're asking for SCMV demographic data.
Yep, racial and socioeconomic.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jeremy, I'd also like to have a copy of that. Thank you.
I think it would be awesome if it could be provided to the full board. And then one other follow-up question. Jeremy, can you tell us if there are parapros that are assigned to SCMV?
They have different support staff, so they're not called parapros, but they're called success coaches and graduation coaches and different support staff, but they're not called parapros or teacher assistants like you might typically see, but they have hired on additional support staff. We have an impact coach, literacy consultant, administrators, full-time teachers, supplemental teachers, and all content areas. So their makeup is specific to their building and just different support staff, but kind of serve the same capacity to whatever the needs are. For example, students who are unengaged need a different level of support. So there's a whole process to make sure those kids are getting reached out to and being supported based on their level of engagement, success, or what have you.
Thank you. Is there a ratio for those success coaches, or like a success coach per a certain amount of students?
Yeah, so they do daily, weekly, monthly kind of contact reports, like what their success is, and they do a lot of documentation. So everything is stored into like a PowerSchool or like a log entry report on the communication back to the students on how they're doing and what the expectation is. So if you're in a class for like a 3-week period, you should be at 25%, you should be at 50% complete, so on and so forth. So that happens on a consistent basis.
One last question. Is that success coach assigned to the student for that full school year?
No. So each 3 weeks, the classes change. So each 3 weeks, you may have a different set of circumstances. So their data is updated regularly. So you wouldn't be assigned to the student for the year because the whole situation can change. Like I said, it's sometimes a transient population. Sometimes they're in, sometimes they're out, brick and mortar, back and forth, another district. There's a lot of kids from all over the place. So they use their data in much a shorter time frame because that's how the classes are scheduled.
And then you mentioned that they can come into the facility by appointment.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that like too many people don't come in at once. And so that's helpful to know when they're coming to make sure we have the appropriate staff present because we do have full-time teachers, but a lot of our teachers are supplemental as well. So sometimes they can meet one-on-one virtually, so they have that access. They can meet in person. We have full-time staff and we have some kind of part-time staff, so we want to make sure we're staffed appropriately, but students do drop in, parents drop in during, hours of operation.
One more question. The success coaches, what are their qualifications? Are they, like what do they have to be? Are they teachers or not?
I'm not sure of their exact qualifications for the job description, but based on the needs of the students. So success coaches are, it's all the supports to keep students on track. And so if we see that the students are not engaging, we want to be able to reach out to them. And so the teachers have a list of students to contact, the coaches have a list of contact, and depending on where you are, if you're a senior, you get like a senior advisor, right? But for others, and so just based on their staff, that gets delegated so that everybody has a similar caseload so that they can meet the needs of those students.
Do they have to have higher level learning, or is it just high school students? Like what's the base for becoming a
I don't
success
think we
coach?
have any high school students. Is it bachelor's degree? Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
And real quick, Jimmy, can I just ask, I know the answer, but I want to be able to hear it. When we were looking at the space requirements or space requests for South Central Michigan Virtual, we met with the staff. Their requests are reflected in what we're doing. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and I think everybody from SEMV staff was invited to that meeting. We took good notes and kind of captured that back, communicated that back out as we were working to look for a space and trying to make sure we're getting an appropriate space to meet the needs of the staff and the building. So in the interim, we added some additional space because they're working in close quarters with what we initially had. And so we added some kind of temporary space until, we're looking at a more permanent space that more meets the needs that were documented by the staff that took place at the end of last year.
Thank you. And then just a couple other things. First, the length of term, so 10 years. Part of that is a return on investment because we will be investing significantly in the space. And obviously, you don't want to put money into a space that you're going to come out of tomorrow. So some of that is the reason and rationale for why we're looking at a 10-year lease with this. Part of it's the requirements of the building itself. So we have some obligations to meet that way. And then just in contrast, Ms. Hamilton, and I mean no disrespect with this, we're not like K-12. Okay, K-12 is a completely online system. There's no opportunity to drop in to work with professionals. There's nobody online to chase you down if you're not completing your coursework. And so we've got several layers, but we hire professionals. We hire reading specialists. We hire math specialists. We hire folks and we create that in-person opportunity that truly blended, so uniquely different than K-12. I just want to make sure, because I know that was brought up, that's not what we are. It's not how we do virtual, and it's been kind of our intent from the very beginning.
How many students do we have there?
Great question. Number fluctuates, but 540 plus minus.
And so how many students in the district? 4,700 and 500 are virtual? Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's a pretty fair number.
And so we get the same amount of money per pupil that do virtual? Okay.
I just wanted to say, I think this option is great. Not all schools have this in the county, and this is wonderful that JPS provides this continuum of service.
Okay, we've had a motion and a second. Now, let's vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No. You might need to do a roll call.
Okay, then let's do roll call.
Ms. Hamilton?
No.
Mrs. Brown?
No.
Mr. Dobies? Mrs. Acton Dowell?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Ms. Hunt?
Yes.
And Mrs. Fitzgerald?
Yes. Motion carries. Now, number 10, bond information, 22-23-149, year-end bond update. Marcus.
Just wanted to give a quick update as we get to the end of the school year here and approaching construction season. So over here at the high school, we're finishing up a few final touches down the locker rooms. Just some things that we wanted to wait until school was over and kids were out to be able to finish up, and then we'll be able to put the wrap on this phase of the high school remodel. Over at Sharp Park, abatement is currently in progress and demo in some areas has started and others will be starting soon. So as you know, we have this last summer to complete Sharp Park and demoing the older part of the building along with the bridge and rebuilding it. The addition has been completed. We've moved the furniture into it and we're working on punching that part and attending to some final matters there. And then I know it's not under the bond, but just a quick update, again, finishing some of those final touches over at the Glick Athletic Center. There were some items that had to wait until spring to be completed and walked and finalized. So we're finishing up that one as well. And our hope is we come back in the fall and we will be all done with the 2018 bond.
That's exceptional news. Thank you very much for that.
Fall of 2024, right?
Okay, information. Board comments. I'd like at this time to have board comments, and I would like to remind you what we've discussed about Robert's rules, that this is not the place to bring up like a negative thing for discussion. It's not a place to have deliberations. It's a place for board members to make a comment they would like to make publicly. Who would like to make a comment for Derek?
I just want to thank, again, the staff and the teachers that help make JPS what it is, and thank Chris for already sharing the Google Drive folder containing all of the JPS year-end surveys for staff, parents, and their students and our students, broken down by school. I just opened it, and it is thick reading. I think Sharp Park was like 160 pages on just like staff evaluation. So it certainly will take some time to go through, but appreciate the openness and transparency. For those that have asked us to look through it, know that that is how fast that the staff responds, and I'm sure that the rest of this board will give it some consideration.
Just note that Hunt has not finished their student one yet, so there might be an update to that.
So I just wanted to thank everyone that came out tonight, and thank you about the field trips. I think that that's really important that everyone's able to go. And I'm sure we can find monies for that. But I've been wading through those surveys this afternoon. Oh my gosh. So they're very eye-opening. So I just want to thank you for all the hard work, the teachers that are here, the staff. I love JPS. I just think it's an amazing school district, and there's so much to offer, and the teachers are just so. I went to the retirement dinner and just wanted to cry because of the excellence of the staff. So thank you.
Another comment, I too want to thank our community and our students, parents, teachers, staff, admin. I know our years, are difficult at times, especially since COVID with just whatever. So thank you all for another amazing year. I hope you're able to rest this summer and come back all refreshed this fall. Thanks.
Thank you. Angela?
I too wanted to thank the staff. I hope everyone has a restful summer. I loved all the end of the year activities all across the district for students and staff. I wanted to give a huge thank you to Jenny O'Brien and Kara Burkheader for organizing the Mackinac trip. I did want to note any parent who needed financial help, it was covered. I also wanted to thank Tammy Gronsky for all of her work with Field Day. That was another excellent activity. And then Chris, of course, for the the huge success of the staff picnic. I heard great things about that.
Did you want to make a comment? No? Okay, I just wanted to say that I am so impressed at our fund balance. Having been in the district for so many years in so many different areas, we have never, ever had a fund balance like this. And we used to spend a lot of our money in interest because don't you love the way the state will set their budget in the fall, but we have to have our budget done at the end of what, June? End of June, without knowing what they're going to give us. So that's a real trick. We always had to borrow until we found out. We don't have to, and I like that very much. I also wanted to say, but thinking about the staff picnic, is that I happened to be in the administrative building that day, and the prizes were absolutely unbelievable. They filled the whole library. It was just wonderful, the outpouring of the community. And I hope the teachers understand how much they're appreciated and how much they make a difference in the lives of our kids and obviously of our families. I was just very pleased with the way the year ended, very, very pleased. And also, thank you for coming out. And I do ask that if you have any questions, don't ever hesitate to contact me. And I will make sure you have the background to understand why something might have happened the way it did. Okay? Thank you. Okay. Calendar. Our regular board meeting is really all we have on our agenda here, or on our calendar. July 18th at the Media Center at 5:30. And at this point, I will entertain a motion.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Support?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much. Go out and enjoy the sunshine and the good weather.